Los Angeles, July 1972. Before the first word is spoken, before the challenge is issued, before 500 people stop breathing at once, a man walks into the Olympic auditorium, finds a seat in the third row, and becomes still. That is where the story begins. Not on the competition floor, not at the microphone, not in the moment 500 witnesses will describe for the rest of their lives. It begins in the third row, with a small man in a dark jacket sitting completely still, watching. 7 seconds later, the largest and most celebrated martial artist in that building would be on the floor. Unable to breathe, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened to him, and the man who put him there would be gone before the applause finished. Los Angeles. Olympic Auditorium, Grand Avenue, July 1972, Tuesday morning. The California summer had already established itself by 9 in the morning, the kind of heat that arrives without warning, asserting its authority over the entire city before most people have finished their first coffee. The Olympic Auditorium sat on Grand Avenue with the quiet weight of a building that had seen everything. Boxing matches, wrestling exhibitions, 40 years of competitive sport, and had arrived at the unshakable confidence of a place that knows exactly what it is. This morning it was filling with the particular crowd that martial arts tournaments attract. Serious people, coaches with clipboards, students who had trained for years without ever taking a breath that wasn't measured. Masters who had spent lifetimes building systems and defending them. They moved through the auditorium with the comfortable ease of people who share a language without needing to speak it. By 10 in the morning, the building was 3/4 full. The bleachers carried the low hum of 500 people paying attention. Overhead, industrial lights buzzed at a frequency just below consciousness. The air held the particular smell of a competition space, old wood, athletic liniment, 40 years of effort worked into the floors. Bruce Lee arrived alone. He was 31 years old. He wore dark trousers and a dark jacket. He moved through the entrance with the same quality of motion that everyone who spent real time around him eventually noticed, the absence of wasted effort. Every step landing exactly where it needed to land. Every movement ending precisely when it was finished. The specific economy of someone who had spent 20 years removing everything unnecessary from every action until only what was required remained. He was not here to compete. He had competed at Long Beach before and stopped. Competition, he had decided, was about beating opponents. What interested him was something else. Understanding, the moment when two different approaches to the body met honestly and the truth of each became visible. He found a seat in the third row near the center aisle. Sat, became still. The stillness was complete. Not the stillness of someone waiting for something to happen. The stillness of someone who was entirely present, entirely here, with nothing withheld and nothing performed. A few people nearby looked twice. Most didn't look at all. He was a lean Chinese man in a dark jacket. The auditorium had other things to look at. He had come to watch, to absorb, to add to the 20 years of observation already stored somewhere in his body, waiting to be useful. The competition begins. The morning's program opened with junior divisions. Young competitors moving through their kata with the mixture of precision and visible effort that junior competition always produces, the techniques correct, but the body not yet settled into them, the gap between knowing and being still clearly present. Bruce watched with the quality of attention he brought to everything that interested him, which was total and direct. He watched the way you read a page, taking everything in, processing it against everything already known, arriving at something new. By 11, the senior divisions were beginning to arrive, the skill level rising with each bracket, the crowd's energy building toward the heavyweight demonstrations that most people had come to see. It was at 11:15 when Seagal entered the floor. He was 20 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, 240 pounds, built by 13 years of dedicated training that had begun at age 7 in the specific discipline of Aikido. He moved through the competition space with the ease of someone who had spent 13 years as the largest and most skilled person in every room he entered. His white gi fit him the way gis fits serious practitioners, slightly too small, strained at the shoulders, the black belt tied with the practiced precision of someone who tied it every day. His hair was thick and slightly wild from morning training. His face carried the open, confident expression of someone for whom surprise was not yet a regular part of life. He entered with 2 training partners, both significantly smaller, which was not unusual because most people were significantly smaller than Steven Seagal at 20 years old. The auditorium noticed him the way auditoriums notice large people who move with confidence, immediately, and without being able to fully explain why. The Aikido demonstration was scheduled as an exhibition between the morning and afternoon competitive divisions. Seagal and his partners moved through it with genuine skill. This needed to be stated clearly because what happened later did not diminish what came before it. The throws were clean, the joint locks precise. The energy redirection that formed the philosophical foundation of Aikido, the idea that force need not meet force directly, that momentum could be received and returned against itself, was visible in every technique. The crowd responded with real appreciation, practitioners recognizing real technique. In the third row, Bruce Lee watched, reading the demonstration the way he read everything, looking for what was true in it, what was missing from it, what it revealed about the person producing it. Seagal's partners absorbed the throws with practiced efficiency, rolling and recovering with the smooth automatic quality of people who had spent years learning how to land safely. The demonstration built in complexity. At one point, Seagal lifted one partner completely off the floor with a single arm. The crowd reacted with the particular sound reserved for genuine athletic spectacle. His face during the demonstration was the face of someone who was doing what they loved and knew they were doing it well. The challenge. After the demonstration concluded, Seagal stood at the edge of the competition floor accepting acknowledgement from coaches and practitioners who had come down from the bleachers. One of his training partners leaned toward him, said something quietly. Seagal turned. He looked toward the third row. He looked at Bruce Lee sitting where he had been sitting since arriving, dark jacket, completely still, watching the next group of competitors warming up on the far side of the floor. Seagal looked for a moment, processed something. Then he said something to his partner and began walking toward the bleachers. Several people near Bruce Lee noticed him coming. The specific quality of attention in the auditorium shifted the way it shifts when something unscheduled is developing. He stopped at the railing in front of the third row. Bruce Lee looked up. Seagal was large above him. The height differential was immediate and concrete. 6'4" above 5'7", 240 pounds above 135, 13 years of Aikido looking down at, as far as Seagal knew, a man who had come to watch. He said that he had heard of Bruce Lee. He said that Bruce Lee was in the movies. He said it the specific way someone says something when they mean something adjacent to what they're saying. The way in the movies contained within it a set of assumptions about the difference between what happens on screen and what happens in reality, and which of those two categories the person being spoken to belonged to. The people in the adjacent seats were very still. Bruce Lee looked up at him. He said he had watched the demonstration. He said it in the even, unhurried tone he used for everything, the tone that carried no performance, just the accurate delivery of what he actually thought. Seagal received the compliment the way 20-year-olds who have not yet been surprised by anything receive compliments, as confirmation. He said that Aikido was the most complete martial art. He said that in a real situation against a real opponent, it was unmatched. He said it with the specific declarative confidence of someone who had trained seriously, competed seriously, won consistently, and had not yet encountered the particular experience that revises that kind of certainty. Bruce Lee listened without changing his expression. He said nothing while Seagal was speaking because he had nothing to add to what Seagal was saying while Seagal was saying it. Then Seagal smiled. It was the easy, performative smile of someone making a challenge they expected to be declined. The generosity of someone who believed the offer would never actually be tested. He said, "Stand against me for 30 seconds. I will call you Master." He said it looking down at Bruce Lee in the dark jacket in the third row with the complete physical confidence of a large young man who had just given an impressive demonstration and was talking to someone who had come as a spectator. He said it as a kind of gift, an invitation to decline gracefully. The people in the adjacent seats were no longer pretending not to listen. Several rows behind had leaned forward. The tournament organizer in the gray suit had looked up from his clipboard. Bruce Lee was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone who was not deciding whether to respond but completing a thought before responding. Then he stood up. He did not stand up the way people stand when they are preparing for something. He stood the way he stood from any chair, with the same economy and the same absence of announcement. He was standing now, and the size differential that had been visible from below was fully visible at close range. He looked at Seagal and said, "All right." One word. The word of someone who had heard an offer and accepted it without drama. Seagal blinked. He had been expecting a different word. Several words that amounted to a polite refusal. The word he received was not that word, and he took a moment to process the gap between what he had expected and what he had gotten before his expression reassembled into confidence, and he nodded and stepped back from the railing. 500 people stopped breathing. They moved to the edge of the competition floor. Word passed through the auditorium the way word passes through a space full of people who were paying attention, quickly and without announcement. The specific current of information that moves through a crowd when something is about to happen that was not on the program. Competitors and coaches and spectators turned toward the two figures at the edge of the floor. Seagal's training partners gave them space. The judges at their table looked up. The tournament organizer, a compact Japanese-American man who had been running martial arts competitions in Los Angeles for 15 years, stood from his chair and watched without intervening, because he had been in this world long enough to recognize certain moments. This was one of them. 500 people in the Olympic auditorium paying attention to two figures at the edge of the competition floor. The quality of that attention was the quality of people who understood that what they were about to watch was real, not appreciative, not comfortable. The held-breath attention of 500 practitioners who knew enough to know they did not know what was about to happen. Seagal took his stance, the stance of someone who knew what they were doing and was doing it correctly. Weight distributed, hands positioned, the body arranged in the specific geometry of Aikido readiness that 13 years of training had made automatic and genuinely functional. He was large and he was ready. His expression was the expression of someone who had issued a challenge and was now honoring it. Bruce Lee stood before him. No stance, arms at his sides. The specific non-arrangement of someone who had moved so far past the need for a formal starting position that the concept had become irrelevant. The body available for whatever the next moment required, without requiring any particular configuration to make it available. His expression was what it had been since Seagal first appeared at the railing, calm and direct, carrying nothing that was not necessary. 500 people went quiet. The industrial lights of the Olympic auditorium hummed above the competition floor. Outside on Grand Avenue, the Tuesday morning continued its indifferent transit, entirely unaware that inside this building, 500 people had stopped breathing. Seagal moved first. He moved the way he had moved through 13 years of training, with the specific committed force of someone whose size and skill had always been sufficient, who had no reason to believe they would not be sufficient now. His right arm came forward in the opening technique of his Aikido practice, a movement his body knew completely, grooved through 10,000 repetitions into something automatic and reliable. It was a real technique, executed by a real martial artist, traveling toward Bruce Lee with the genuine commitment of someone who was not performing but doing. Bruce Lee was not there when it arrived. He had moved left and slightly forward simultaneously. A displacement so minimal that the 500 people watching would later argue about whether they had seen it. The specific quality of movement that removes a target from a line of force without requiring the target to travel any significant distance simply steps offline by exactly the amount the situation requires, nothing more. Seagal's technique completed itself through empty air. His body, committed fully to the movement, carried its momentum forward into the space where Bruce Lee had been and found nothing. In the fraction of a second that followed, Bruce Lee's right hand moved. Not a punch, not a strike in the conventional sense of that word. A single precise contact at the specific point on Seagal's throat where the larynx sits exposed between the muscle on either side. The point that every fighting system in human history has learned to protect, because the body understands what is there even when the mind does not fully articulate it. The point where a calibrated force delivered with exact placement does not need to be large to be total. Bruce Lee's fingers arrived at that point with the full transfer of 20 years of daily work concentrated into a contact that lasted less than 1/10 of a second and delivered its information completely. What the information said was this: breathe. And for a moment, Steven Seagal could not. The throat closed around the contact point the way throats close when they receive this specific signal. The involuntary muscular response of a body that has been told by its own nervous system that the airway requires protection. And the result was the specific sensation of air that will not move. The sudden absence of the thing that has been available every moment of every day of 20 years of life and training. His legs did not receive the message that keeps legs upright. The message they received instead was the message a body sends when the most fundamental thing it requires has been briefly interrupted. And that message was, fall. Seagal fell, 6'4". 240 pounds of trained martial artist going down to the competition floor with the particular completeness of a large body going down completely. Not a stumble. Not a controlled descent. A fall. The full length of him arriving on the hardwood while his hands went to his throat and his mouth opened for air that was already beginning to return but had not fully returned yet. The body's systems reasserting themselves in the sequence they always reassert themselves. Slowly enough that the 5 seconds he spent on the floor with his hands at his throat were 5 seconds of the most clarifying experience his 20 years had yet produced. The Olympic auditorium did not make a sound for 4 full seconds. 500 people who had spent their lives in martial arts, who had seen throws and knockouts, and submissions and every variety of technique human beings had developed for the purpose of stopping other human beings, were completely silent, because what they had just watched did not fit cleanly into any of those categories. Which is to say, it fit into all of them simultaneously. Which is to say, it was something that arrived and completed itself in a duration so brief, with a precision so absolute, that the 500 people watching were still processing the before and had not yet arrived at the after. Bruce Lee was standing exactly where he had been standing when Seagal fell. His right hand was at his side. His expression had not changed since he accepted the challenge at the railing, calm, direct, carrying nothing that was not necessary. The expression of someone for whom what had just happened was simply what was required in the moment, and was now complete. Seagal's breath returned, all at once with the specific relief of something briefly absent now present again. He drew it in with the particular quality of someone reminded of something they had not previously thought to be grateful for. He rolled to his side. He pushed himself to his knees. He took another breath. He looked up at Bruce Lee standing above him. His expression was an expression his face had not worn before this morning. The expression of a 20-year-old who had arrived at the Olympic auditorium with 13 years of training and absolute certainty, and was leaving with something more valuable than either. The specific knowledge that there is always someone who has done the work longer, and deeper, and more completely. And that this knowledge does not diminish what you have built. It simply places it accurately within a larger picture that you could not see from inside your own certainty. He got to his feet. He straightened. He looked at Bruce Lee directly. He said, "You are a master, not completing a bargain, stating a fact." The flat, honest delivery of someone who had just learned something real in the most direct classroom available and was acknowledging the lesson with the dignity it deserved. Bruce Lee looked at him for a moment. He nodded once. Then he walked back to the third row of the bleachers, picked up his dark jacket, put it on, and walked toward the exit of the Olympic auditorium with the same unhurried economy with which he had entered it, moving through 500 people who parted around him now with a different quality of attention than the crowd that had not noticed him when he arrived. And the Tuesday morning outside on Grand Avenue continued as it was continuing before. Indifferent and ongoing. Carrying the city forward into afternoon the way mornings always carry cities forward, without pausing for what happened inside any particular building. As all mornings do. As all mornings will. What remained on the floor, Steven Seagal stood in the middle of the competition floor for a moment after Bruce Lee had gone. Surrounded by 500 people who were beginning to find their voices again. The auditorium slowly reassembling its normal noise around the specific silence he was still standing inside. His 2 training partners approached. They said nothing. There was nothing to say that the floor had not already said more clearly. He looked at the point on the competition floor where he had landed. The specific square of hardwood that had received him 7 seconds after he issued a challenge he believed was safe to issue. He stood there long enough to understand something. The distance between what he knew this morning when he walked in and what he knew now was not a small distance. It was in fact the largest distance he had ever traveled. And he had traveled it in 7 seconds, without going anywhere at all. The tournament organizer in the gray suit approached him quietly, asked if he was all right. Seagal said yes. He said it the way people say yes when they mean something more complicated than yes. The tournament organizer nodded and returned to his table. He had a tournament to run. The afternoon divisions began in 40 minutes, and the Olympic Auditorium did not pause for the education of 20-year-olds, however significant that education might be. Seagal watched him go. Then, he looked at the exit through which Bruce Lee had left. The specific door in the specific wall of the specific building where a Tuesday morning in July 1972 delivered something that 13 years of training had not. The precise location of the boundary of what he knew. Drawn not in theory, not in conversation, not in a classroom or a training hall or a philosophical text. Drawn in hardwood, drawn in 7 seconds. Drawn in the specific, brief, total absence of air that his throat remembered and would remember. And that would be present in some form every time he took a stance for the rest of his career. Not as fear, not as doubt, but as the specific, useful knowledge of someone who has stood at the edge of their own certainty, looked over it, and come back with something that certainty alone could never have produced. The story spread through the Los Angeles martial arts community before the afternoon divisions had even concluded. Not with the exaggeration that usually accompanies the retelling of significant events, not growing into something larger and more dramatic than it had been. It stayed exactly the size it was. Because the truth of it was already large enough that embellishment would only have diminished it. 500 practitioners, coaches, students, and masters had watched a 20-year-old at the peak of his confidence issue a challenge he believed was generous and lose in 7 seconds to a man he had never heard of. They had watched it happen too fast for their eyes to follow reliably. They had stood in the specific silence of people who have witnessed something real and are still deciding what it means. And in the days that followed, as they told what they had seen to people who had not been there, the same details returned in every version. The way Bruce Lee had stood in the third row and become still, before any of it began, the absence of a stance when the moment arrived. The impossibility of the movement, too small, too fast, no visible preparation. The single precise contact. And then the floor. What no version of the story could fully convey was the silence that followed. 500 people who had dedicated serious portions of their lives to understanding combat. People who had seen throws and submissions and knockouts and every category of technique the human body had developed for stopping another human body, and none of them could speak. Because what they had seen didn't fit inside any single category. It fit inside all of them at once. One of the judges at the table that morning, a man who had refereed martial arts competitions in California for over a decade, said something afterward to a colleague that was repeated for years in certain training circles. I've watched 10,000 techniques. That wasn't a technique. That was a principle. He meant that most techniques, even excellent ones, are visible. You can see the decision being made, the body gathering itself, the commitment of weight and direction. What Bruce Lee did in those 7 seconds contained no visible decision, no gathering, no commitment. It was simply the most efficient response to the information available, executed before the mind of any observer could begin to process that information. That distinction between technique and principle, between the learned move and the living response, was exactly what Bruce Lee had been trying to teach for years. In his notes, in his school, in his late-night conversations with students who stayed after class asking questions. He had been saying, in 100 different ways, stop fighting the pattern you practiced. Start responding to what is actually there. 7 seconds at the Olympic Auditorium was that lesson in its purest form. Not explained. Not demonstrated on a willing partner. Real, Steven Seagal did not leave the auditorium immediately. He sat in the bleachers through the afternoon divisions with his training partners, watching the competitors cycle through their brackets. His expression was quieter than it had been in the morning. Not defeated, something more useful than defeated. Recalibrated, he had come to the Olympic Auditorium that morning with 13 years of serious work behind him. The throws were real. The locks were real. The energy redirection that was the core of his art, the idea that you could receive force without opposing it, was genuinely understood and genuinely practiced. None of that was false. None of it had been revealed as empty. What had been revealed was something different. What had been revealed was the specific distinction between knowing a principle and being that principle. Between understanding, in theory, that you receive rather than oppose, and moving with the unconditional efficiency of someone for whom that understanding had gone past theory, past practice, past conscious application, and become simply the way the body moved. Seagal had spent 13 years learning to redirect force. Bruce Lee had spent 20 years becoming redirection itself. That was the distance, not the distance between Aikido and Jeet Kune Do. Not the distance between one style and another, the distance between a man who had been training for 13 years and a man who had been training for 20. And more than that, the distance between a man who was still aware of what he was doing and a man who had long since passed beyond awareness into simple presence. What Seagal carried out of the Olympic auditorium that Tuesday was not a wound, it was a map. The map showed him exactly where the boundary of what he knew was located, and knowing the location of a boundary is the only way to begin moving it. 500 witnesses. 7 seconds. One lesson that no one who was there ever forgot. The man who laughed at Bruce Lee's size stopped laughing before he hit the floor, and the man who put him there never said a word. That's the difference between a man who knows what he can do and a man who simply is it.